Kia ora, folks. That is the usual introduction for Paul. I'm with Paul.
Hello there.
Paul Barlow.
It's hello there, Kia ora.
Hello there, Kia ora.
I stole it from Obi-Wan Kenobi.
Right, okay.
So it seemed like a good way to start.
So Paul runs an extraordinary online service for our community, especially at this time in our political history in New Zealand, called Paul the Other One. It's on YouTube. He's got a wonderful website, which I'll direct to below this video. And I'm spending a bit of time here with Paul in Auckland. He's in Albert Park with me to talk about the kind of political landscape that we're facing, especially in the advent of the local body elections, which are coming up in the next 2 months, and everyone's going to get their mail ballots in early September. So look, Paul, tell me a little bit about what you've been doing in the online space.
Pissing people off is probably the easiest way of describing it. I try and take a look at what we see in media, what's presented by politicians, political figures, people who want every position in the country, from Prime Minister through to local board member, see how they present themselves and what information they might be hiding and how we can bring that to light. So I like to claim that I'm bringing truth to a lie, but I think in reality I'm just having a look at the radio and the newspapers and seeing what's out there and putting it up on screen most days.
What are the big... Obviously we've got, in some districts, including from where I'm from in Kāpiti, we got 87 people put their name up, and in some areas we're getting a number of seats which are uncontested, which could describe complacently or what have you. But there's a number of areas where there's lots of groups formed that we didn't see the same way in 2022 for the local body elections. Can you give us a bit of a frame, maybe a bit of a history of where we've got to and where we've come from in the last 3 years with these elections?
So at the last elections, last local elections, we know Voices for Freedom were out there telling their followers, you should run for council, but don't tell people that you're affiliated with us, because people are a bit about Voices for Freedom. Since then, they've had 3 years to sort of narrow down what they were doing, to hone their skills. They've had some people elected, and there are councillors around the country in different parts of the areas that have elected officials linked to Voices for Freedom, who are now training up the next generation on what to do. And so you've got a much more honed, skilled, developed program in place for people who might have the same belief structure as Voices for Freedom, that want to go out there and have their say on councils. The problem, though, is that inherently Voices for Freedom is a disinformation group. And so the way they frame things, the way that they put things out to the public, it might be mostly honest, but the way it's framed might miss something out or deliberately misconstrue something. And a lot of the candidates that are running, particularly in your area, actually you've got quite a few there, that's their angle. It's, potholes might be bad, or rates increases are tough, or managed retreat is something we don't like, but they don't talk about why potholes are expensive to fill, or why rates have to go up, or they'll ignore things like the rate of inflation for industrial purchases versus CPI, and they conflate the two. So it's really interesting to see that this year we've got a whole bunch of candidates running all over the country. The number I got this morning was close to about 300 potential candidates all over the place that have these links. And it's a really important thing for voters to have the ability to understand who it is that they're voting for. They can vote for whoever they like,
of course, but
if they don't have the full picture and the full information on who they're voting for, how is that fair on the voters?
So if one of these reps were here right now asking the questions instead of I, and being a devil's advocate, I'd say to you, how do you know we or they are about disinformation, and what gives you that proof that that's what's going on here?
So there is a whole bunch of ways that the public can look into this kind of stuff. Have a look at the content that they're putting up on their Facebook pages or on their social media feeds. If they're using sources that are really deliberately biased, like reality check radio, for example, that's the media arm for Voices for Freedom, and everybody knows that, they don't hide it. But if they have a really specific stance, the Taxpayers Union is a really good one. The Taxpayers Union claims that they're a union out there for everybody, but they platform some very right-leaning ideologies out there. And they're one of the people that are pushing this rates cap that's going on. But they don't talk about that infrastructure cost, for example, or why rates are going up, just that rates are bad. If you see a candidate that's constantly putting that kind of information out and using sources like reality check radio, challenging councils, those are people that you should be taking as having a red flag waving in front of their face.
Right. Tell me about some of the, and I know which we'll link here also, your extraordinary piece of work called
Fabricated Consent.
And a lot of people have been watching that. And certainly it's really poignant around our area, because some of the ringleaders of these groups, Dean Harris no secret, who's running under the We Love Kāpiti banner.
Yeah.
Can you tell me about some of these other groups and how they're either interconnected, because they're not operating individually? I mean, people are not operating individually. They form groups.
Yeah, absolutely. Dean's actually a really fascinating example because we know he's the Wellington Regional Voices for Freedom Coordinator. I don't believe he lives in Kāpiti itself, and the reason he said that he wants to run is politics. But we also know that Dean is the person behind the Concerned Ratepayers NZ website, which purports to be about all ratepayers everywhere in the country. We have the Whois record of who purchased the website. It's Dean. And we can link it back to him using the address that he had registered for a business. On that website, they recommend a whole bunch of other local ratepayer organisations, which are all run by other local Voices for Freedom coordinators. So we can see this network starting to form everywhere. We've got video and photos, for example, of Dean doing presentations that are being promoted by Voices for Freedom in their Council Watch campaign that they're running. So we know that they're out there building these individual networks. But at the same time, we know that there are people in each individual community, like Jackie Wheeler in Palmerston North, for example, who she is community-based. She's still their Voices for Freedom coordinator, and she's running for council. So you create these webs that are kind of like a really good transport system, you know, hubs that you can access from different transport places. But they do all coordinate together. It's why if you ever look at the residents and ratepayers naming conventions, they're all really similar.
Which is a great segue into this. People look at the names of these Concerned Ratepayers, Kāpiti, Concerned Ratepayers, Wellington, and of course in my area, which is of particular interest to me and my constituents, We Love Kāpiti. These names are not just plucked out of at a little Google search to say what should we call our party, which sounds nice. Can you talk to me about why they've named things this way?
So they do it for a couple of different reasons. One is to make sure that there's that attachment to the place. You know, We Love Kāpiti sounds like, yeah, they love Kāpiti. But again, we don't know where Dean lives, so how much does he actually love the region is a question that could be asked. There are a lot of acronyms that we see popping up. We see a lot of really simple names because it's really easy for people to remember them. It's all about making sure you hear it a couple of times so it sticks in your brain, so when you get your voting forms you can go, oh, I know what this is, tick the box.
And it's almost a bit deeper than that, isn't it? Because it's so nice and simple, why would it be offensive to you?
Yeah. Who isn't a concerned ratepayer? You know,
Right.
There's a whole bunch of really basic stuff that goes into that sort of thinking. Everybody should be a concerned ratepayer, and it doesn't matter if you own a property or rent a property, you still pay rates. You should be concerned what your rates are going on. Absolutely makes perfect sense. But the talking points that they come up with, they get coached on quite a bit. There was actually a list that was released last week, I think it was, in that great story that Charlie did. About some of the questions that they get coached on.
So this is a story in the press in the weekend, just gone, that Charlie Mitchell, who's a journalist for the press
down in Christchurch. They get coached on things like, don't tell people that you're anti-fluoride, tell them that you think, maybe we just need to do more testing. Don't tell people that you are dead set against rates increases, tell them you want better value for your rates. And as a ratepayer, you know what better value looks like. They're vague, but they're also kind of misleading because they are so vague.
Do you think, Paul, they're just disruptors? They want to get in there to fuck up the system, to really disrupt it? Or is there something more sinister at play as well? Because as I said to you before we turned the camera on here, we're in the kind of post-COVID, the hate Jacinda, the Trump mode of politics, and it's replicated in our national politics with ACT in New Zealand First, bringing out race baiting, dividing communities to get at each other, regardless of not speaking Te Reo first on a passport or wherever. It's far more kind of nuanced than that.
Yeah, there's a ton of nuance that goes into it. And one of these things that's really common for all of these groups, everywhere all over the motu, is that they don't really have a vision. So I don't know if I'd say it's super sinister. They're not here to bring down the system and stop everything completely. They want the world to be seen through their perspective and their communities to see everything through their perspective. It's just their perspective is informed by disinformation that slowly gets pushed to the right. So if you take a look at content out of Reality Check Radio, for example, we've seen them platform literal white supremacist neo-Nazis from Europe like it's normal. And that's the kind of talking points that these groups and organisations are trying to normalise. Most average people in this country aren't going to want to sit down and listen to what a white supremacist neo-Nazi from Europe has to say, but they're platforming it. And so I think the sinister side of things is that they're actually trying to change how we view the world and what we consider the compass that we make our decisions based on. And if they've got their hands on the seats of power, whether that's local board, community boards, all the way through to the top office in the country, that's a lot of influence to change the way that people think.
So how have you put all this work together? Because, you know, clearly there's been a great, I'm just going to wait till our Auckland City Council cleaner goes past the band rotunda here in Albert Park. Because that's what real council work looks like.
There are so many facets to council that
we'd ask concerned ratepayers groups across the country, you know, under that banner, they wouldn't understand what these jobs are.
That does look like an electric vehicle.
It does.
It's relatively new, and it's sweeping a park. Is that a need to have or a nice to have? Because there are no leaves on the trees. Because it's
Don't get me started taking the well-beings away. You know, this kind of football that's gone back and forth. You know, we're in Kāpiti and Waikino, we're about to start building our new library, which is way more than a library these days. Te Ara Whetū, it's going to be called. It's going to be a central community hub. But, you know, you'd argue that's a nice to have. Yeah. It is nice to have. And not only nice to have, councils have a real role in making communities livable. That's why people live in community.
Yeah.
Not just to have no potholes. You know, what's a sense of community all about?
Yeah. Most people, when you ask them what is a nice to have, will have an individual list.
Right.
And everyone's list will be different. And that's why it's such a stupid line to use. Nice to haves is different to everyone. It's completely subjective.
So banging the rate drum like they do, you know, get rates down, having a cap on it like Jordan Williams and would say on the Taxpayers Union, or the We Love Kāpiti and Concerned Ratepayers to say that rates should only be at 2%. Is not realistic, and it's a complicated conversation. Councillors all over the country struggle with managing income against expenditure and infrastructure. We're lucky in Kāpiti, a lot of our big infrastructure is really quite well advanced and well controlled. Wellington has enormous difficulties on ageing work that hasn't been done. We talked about in the LGN conference in Christchurch just 2 weeks ago that councils that haven't invested in this is our parents who were running councils back then, we're not putting money down and fixing things under the ground, etc.
Yeah, that's it exactly. It's years of artificially depressed rates, and those have to pop at some point. And there's only so much pressure you can put on these systems. You look at something like Wellington, their water pipe infrastructure is 120 years old in some places. Of course it's going to break down, you know, they haven't been, it's really hard to maintain pipes underground without ripping everything up every now and then. I was talking to, I think it was a councillor in Hamilton, who she keeps getting told, you know, rates are terrible and why are all these increases going up, from people who have been on council since she was born.
Right.
And so they're the people who are being responsible for this, and they make the decisions because rates increases hurt, rates increases are necessary, and you have to find that balance. So when you see a group going out there going, oh, rates increase bad, it should only be this amount, they're not looking at everything that's in play, and there is a ton of nuance there. But a catchy slogan's a catchy slogan.
I remember at the opening speech of the Prime Minister at last year's conference at Takina in Wellington, in Poniki, that he was screaming that morning about the water bursting pipe down Taranaki Street that morning. Great for a speech.
Yeah.
And yet we're staying in this extraordinary building of Takina Convention Centre that the council had helped fund and build.
Before time and under budget.
Right, and of course now, 2 weeks ago, the local government conference was down in Wellington at Te Pā, an extraordinary thing that the government put, you know, $500 million into almost, and there was not mention of that. So when Luxon didn't even turn up to the conference this year as our Prime Minister, it showed disdain for local government. He zoomed in, and his speech consisted of 3 minutes, I think, if that. And he walked away, and that was it. And of course he couldn't bash that kind of expenditure on the nice to have.
Yeah, see, I suspect Chris Luxon doesn't have much experience with local government beyond paying his rates and all his properties and having multiple votes because he owns properties in multiple areas. Right. Whereas somebody like Simeon, as much as I dislike him, he did have time on one of the local boards here in Auckland before he ended up going to Wellington. He does have a rudimentary understanding of what's going on, which in a way kind of makes some of their decisions even worse because he knows what they're dealing with.
So we'll just wind up, but what are some of your takeaways from where we're at this point in time? Because as I said to you, we're in many much a perfect storm post-Trump, the hate Jacinda gang. We've got the most right-leaning government coalition we've had since before Muldoon. Muldoon wasn't even like this.
Yeah.
You know, so, you know, when they want to target things like not saying te reo and so on and so on, you know, I just want your kind of feelings on that, where we are at this point heading into these local body elections.
I think people underestimate how much those big government things, like removing the te reo signs, for example, or playing around with the passport, that kind of stuff, it enables a whole bunch of other talking points at every level of governance. So it makes it much more normalised for somebody to run in a council going, why do we have to have a Te Reo name on our logo?
Why do we have to
for
have a
example?
karakia?
Yeah, exactly. So people underestimate that big impact. What we see being led out of Wellington does impact the rest of the country. And the people who do go out and vote in local body council elections, they tend to be more conservative, they tend to be older, they tend to get a lot more of their information in groups like Facebook, for example, instead of going out to those Meet the Candidate events or actually, dropping an email to the people that are running and asking them questions. So I think one of the things we really need to be aware of as voters is just what's out there and what's the information that's being fed to us by the candidates, because all candidates, yourself included, will say what you want to say on, say, the 150-word blurb that you've got that people vote for. And you have limited space to do that. Getting to know a candidate and getting to know what they actually stand for is a far better way to make an informed decision, but also being aware of those big pressures that are happening all over the place that feed into the decisions that elected officials have to make, that the public have to be aware of before they go out and vote.
So maybe the final question will be, what would you be asking people out here who are going to vote? And of course we know that a big percentage of the population doesn't vote, sadly, because the system doesn't favour that, it's postal, it's an older demographic. What would you be asking them to ask candidates, myself included, but my particular interest is of these disruptor type candidates that are coming through? What would you be asking?
The one question I think you should ask any candidate running is, what is your vision for the future for our community? A lot of these disruptive candidates, they're focusing on short-term cosmetic stuff. It's potholes, bad, don't like the sun, whatever. But what does that mean for my community 10 years from now? What does it mean for my kids and my grandkids growing up if they're here? What do they get out of it? How do they feel about the place that we want to call home? So I think vision is definitely the big thing you should be asking any candidate.
Great. Well, look, a shout out to you, and I know there's hundreds, if not thousands, across New Zealand who email and talk to you for the work you're doing on your channel, and they can access all that via your website, which is Paul Barlow.
Paul the other one.
Oh, Paul.
PaulTheOtherOne.com. If you go PaulTheOtherOne.com/LG25, we've got a whole bunch of resources there, videos on what your council does, your different voting systems, how you can do research into disinformation candidates, and a whole bunch of fact check that's been done as well through third-party independent fact checkers around different organisations or groups or claims that have been made by elected officials. There's a ton of resources there for everyone.
And it's Paul, P-A-U-L.
P-A-U-L.
And it's not just you have a nice team of network of people who are helping you support the work that
I've
you're
got
putting
some
together.
amazing researchers out there.
So thank you. I really appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
And I've got a little gift for you.
Yeah, this is brilliant.
This is from Elections New Zealand, and I picked this up as my gift from the Commission for putting my name in for the election. But I thought it deserved a better home than myself, because on it says here, and you'll see this, it says here, I'm in it for New Zealand. And I thought actually, the one who's really in it for New Zealand is people like you, Paul.
Thank you very much. It'll go in the studio. I'll make sure it's up there for the next video.
Great. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right. Appreciate your work.
Anytime.
Cheers.